interesting verse here as he's beginning to list some of the workers. And in this particular passage, he doesn't tell us who the king is. And we recognize in an earthly sense, he's talking about people that are working for an earthly king. You and I are not working for an earthly king, but thank God we're working for the heavenly king. And what a joy it is tonight. And for a few moments, I want to preach on that thought, for the king. Number one, notice, if you will, the people of service. The Bible said these were the potters, those that dwelt among plants and hedges. Now, let me say this about people that are potters and that work among the hedges and the gardens and the plants. You have to understand that that's a humble position. I mean, to be a potter, of all the things that you could do in the kingdom, working in the garden, keeping the grounds, may not be as exciting as some other things. Maybe if you could pick your place, you might want something different, but it was a humble position. But it was an honest position. Hallelujah. That's what I get for making fun of Skinny Kenny. But anyway, it was an honest position. They were serving the king. You know, what difference does it make, the title that I have, if I'm serving the king? What difference does it make, the place that I serve, if God puts me in that place to be a Sunday school teacher, to be a bus worker, to serve as an usher, whatever he gives me to do through the leadership of the man of God in the house of God, it's an honest position. But something else about that, it's a holy position. If you're serving the king, listen, I don't care what the title is, what the position is, you've been given that place by the king. I mentioned preaching when I was 13. There were a lot of things I couldn't do as a teenager. I could preach when God opened the doors, but I wasn't ready to pastor. When I was 15, Brother Tom, a church extended a call for me to come and be their pastor. I don't mean this wrong. You're talking about some really, really messed up people. But they called my dad and said, we'd like to talk to your son about coming and being our pastor. Dad said he's not interested. I said to my dad later, I said, you're right, I'm not ready, but, didn't you want to kind of ask me? He said, no. He said, first of all, you can't even drive a car. How would you get there? It's 40 miles away from where we live. You're not moving into the parsonage by yourself. And he said, I'm not driving you over there every week, and you can't ride your bike that far. Your dad could, but I couldn't. He keeps trying to get me on the bike. But anyway, but my dad said to me, when you can make your bed consistently, we'll talk about this pastor thing again. I wasn't ready to pastor. And by the way, I thank God he didn't even give them the opportunity to talk to me. But what I am saying is, listen, wherever God places us, it's a holy position. So we notice the people of service, but notice the place of service. The Bible said these were the potters and those that dwelled among the plants and hedges. Notice the word there. There, what is there? That's where the king placed them. Everybody needs to find their there and just get there and stay there and be there wherever God's put you. Until God puts you somewhere else, stay there. When I was a boy growing up, my dad loved to garden. He loved to garden. Loved it almost to the nth degree. We lived out in the country when Dad pastored at Tremont, and on one side of our driveway, the house set way back off the road, there was a pasture as you were pulling in on the right side. That's where I kept my horse, and we kept cow and things like that, and a good-sized pasture there. And on the other side of the driveway was my dad's main garden. It was as big as the pasture area where I kept the horse and the cow. It was huge. We wouldn't call it a garden. We'd call it a truck patch. And then he had another garden behind the house, and then he had another garden a little bit smaller, and he just loved to garden. That was kind of his break from all the duties and mundane areas of life. And I would say to him, Dad, this is too much. We can't ever eat all of this. No, we're going to give it away. We're going to be a blessing. And I said, well, why don't we invite people over to help us hoe the garden and take care of the weeds and let them be a blessing to us? But he never wanted to do it that way. But in the garden there with my dad, he did a lot of counseling. In fact, it's some of the greatest counsel I ever got. My dad told me, he said, son, I can't tell you who to marry, but I can tell you this. When you find the will of God for your life, she'll fit the picture. And he said, in your case, it'll improve the picture. But anyway, a lot of counsel in the garden. But you know, when you think about gardening, the work that's there, to some it might seem unimpressive, it might seem unexciting. But can you imagine if you're the king and people come to your kingdom and they're looking at your palace and they're seeing all the beauty and all the decor of the flowers and the plants and the pottery and the shrubbery, and they go out into the garden behind the place and all the beauty and the splendor that's there, and everybody's praising the king. Wow, look at this, king, this is so beautiful. But I want to tell you what, behind the king, there were a lot of people that were grinning ear to ear, knowing that they'd pleased the king. And nobody else may ever say a word about it. Nobody else may ever pat him on the back. You may have been here this week and you've worked your fingers to the bone. You're weary, you're tired. You've been in church every night this week, plus Sunday. You've had 2 preachers, 3 preachers every night, and you've sat here and you've gone through this whole time. And maybe the preacher, trying to appreciate everybody, he may have missed you, but I'll tell you who hasn't missed it. The king is watching. He knows what you've done. And hey, if you're in, you're there. That's all that matters when you get before him and he says, well done, thou good and faithful servant. What a blessing that will be. We notice number 3, the privilege of the service. The Bible said there, look at this next phrase, they dwelt with the king. Pretty good place to hang around. I don't mean this wrong. When you compare king to potter, king to gardener, king to groundskeeper, you understand the others that worked in the kingdom, they might have seen the king from time to time, but these people dwelt with the king. I mean, they're really not, from a human standpoint, royalty, but they're hanging with royalty. And I want to tell you something, dear friend, when you became a child of God, he placed that royal blood in your vein. And in the eyes of the world, you may be a nobody, but I'm telling you, you're a child of the king. You get to dwell where the king dwells. What a blessing that is. Why would you want to dwell by the king, Brother Graham? Well, first of all, to be mindful of his desires. King said, I want to keep y'all close so you'll know what I want. I want to stay close to the king, don't you? So that he can whisper in my ear, hey, Ken, this is what I want you to do. Hey, son, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I have for you. Here's how you could best serve me. Here's where you could labor for me. We see the fact that they dwelt with the king, not only to be mindful of his desires, but to be more like the king. Wouldn't it be something if people would walk by and see the gardener and for a moment think, wow, you sure do know the king pretty well. I'm listening to you talk, you kind of sound like you've been hanging around him. I don't mean this wrong, but wouldn't it be wonderful if every once in a while somebody could see something in us that would remind them of our heavenly king? That they might see something about us that says, hey, I can see something different about you. I heard this young man that got saved this week, been sober a week. I'm going to tell you something, that's wonderful, that's thrilling, that's exciting. And I'm telling you, the king's got some great things planned for your life. I was thinking about a man in our church this week, I believe, or last week, I saw that he had put out there, Brother Tom, that he's been sober now for 5 years. And God has changed his life. I remember when they came and the brokenness of their life and the fact that drugs had taken the children out of the home, and all of a sudden as God began to work in their life and things began to change in their life and they were reached, and what a difference it made. And can I tell you, I remember the day when they said, preacher, pray, we're being told that we can possibly have some visitation rights. They got that. And then they said we're going to be able to have unsupervised visitation rights. And then they went before the judge, and the judge said, I've never seen such a remarkable change in a couple. We're going to grant you custody of your daughter again. She's moving back into the house. And what a joy it is to see what the gospel of Jesus Christ can do to change a life. And listen, to go from that situation to being able to see the stamp of his image on them, to be more like him, more like the master would I ever be. I am an old-time, fundamental, Bible-believing, King James, soul-winning, separated Baptist. But I'm not mad at anybody except the devil. I'm going to tell you something. What we need a great revival of is Christ-like spirit. Did you ever notice how hard Jesus was on the religious Pharisees, yet how compassionate he could be with sinners? Oh, listen, I want people to, sometimes you go in places and you'll meet people and boy, you can tell their world's been turned upside down. Listen, I'm not preaching lifestyle evangelism, not for a moment, but can I tell you something? If you'll live a life for Jesus as you witness for Him, what an impact you can have. Let it be real. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And maybe somebody will ask the question, hey, how would I get what you've got? Oh, to be like Him, the privilege of service. The Bible talked about what an honor it is to serve Him, but then think about number 4, the priority of service. The priority of service. The Bible said, and there they dwelt with the king, notice this, for his work. The ministry's work. The Christian life is work. Now, we're not working to get saved, but we're working because we are saved. As he said a while ago, for by grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. But it goes on to say, for we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works. Let me tell you something, there ought to be a desire, a driving desire in our heart to want to be a part of His great work. What a joy it is to be able to share the good news with the lost and dying world. What a joy it is to be able to tell people what a difference Christ can make in their life. Ecclesiastes 10:7 said, I've seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. Can I say that's out of order? You and I need to realize, never forget, I don't care how many titles we get, how many accolades we get, how many pats on the back we get, at the end of the day, we're servants. Man, to be a servant. When I was a kid, I got saved down at Camp Zion, Myrtle, Mississippi, and we're talking about a long, long time ago. Dr. Percy Ray drove a golf cart there on the campground. He'd go pick up his guest preachers and bring them over to the tabernacle to preach. And my job, I got to ride on the golf cart with Brother Ray. My job was to jump off anytime I saw a piece of trash and pick it up. And my buddies made fun of me. Because during the breaks between sessions, they'd want to go play and they'd want to go, goof off. And I'd hang with Brother Percy Ray and pick up trash. They'd make fun of me. Oh, man, they called me Percy's slave. But I rode in that golf cart with R.G. Lee. I rode in that golf cart with many, many great, and by the way, I'm not talking about name dropping, I'm just telling you, great men of God. And I'd go in, my job was to do whatever Brother Ray said. If I had to go, I'd straighten up stuff on the pulpit. I'd, take care of different things that he needed done and try to have everything ready for the next service. But man, I got to meet some of God's choicest servants. Can I tell you something? There's just something about being a part of His work. What a joy, what an honor, what a blessing. Listen, friend, to be able to be a part of the great work of God. Church, you're 10 years old, and can I tell you something? Your church has already been blessed to see so many wonderful things. Oh, I can tell you about places give anything in the world if they could have a building like this. I preached in countries where they don't have this kind of facility. I preached in places where they don't have the opportunities that you have. And many of them, even in some places, are under threat against their life to be able to meet. And we come here and can freely meet. And boy, what a blessing it is. I'm excited about the steeple. And people say, oh, you don't need a steeple. I want to tell you something. It'll be a testimony in this town. I'm excited about it. I like it. I just can't wait to see it up there. Who's putting it up? Are you? No, I'm just kidding. Man, I'd hate to. But it's amazing. And what an exciting thing that is to see this beautiful facility and to recognize what God has done. But you know what I'm also recognizing tonight? It's not over. There's much more to be done. There's much more labor. There's much more work. And listen, I want to tell you, we've got to remember we're servants of the King. We're living for Him, serving Him. And so can I say that we must labor for the King? I just want to be faithful in my corner of the field. Wherever He places me, whatever He'd have me do. Can I tell you, it's a joy to serve the Lord. Says, oh, it must be tough, Brother Graham. I'll tell you something, I'm having the time of my life. Who'd ever dreamed? I remember sitting in world history when I was a teenager in the public school and daydreaming. Are there any teachers in here? Oh, I'm sorry, teachers. But you got to forgive me. I was a teenager. And I daydream once in a while. And we were studying world history, and in particular, we were dealing with the Soviet Union, which, of course, has broken up. But back then, it was still all the Soviet Union. And I was reading books as a teenager about guys that were smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union. And I'd daydream about being able to go and preach Wouldn't it be something if one day I could go stand in Russia, be able to proclaim the gospel? Maybe I could be a part of those that were sneaking Bibles in. Can I tell you something? In 1992, I made 2 trips to Russia, and I didn't even have to sneak in, and we carried Bibles in. And I can remember the joy and rejoicing it was as I stood in Red Square and preached the gospel of Jesus Christ and saw people saved right there where communism's headquarters was. It was pretty exciting. I remember one English teacher, we had shared a Bible with the teachers, and she had asked if she could have an English Bible. She was an English teacher, though she was Russian, and she said, if you don't mind, I'd like a King James Bible. So that's all we brought. She said, I just love the way it reads, and I'd love to have a copy. But then she said this to me, now I could never be a Christian. It's been ingrained in my mind all of my life, there is no God. But she said, I wouldn't mind if my children could get saved or become Christians, is what she said. We gave her a Bible. I was there in May. I got back in October. She had already read the Bible all the way through. It was on her second trip through the Bible, and here's what she said. I was wrong. It's not too late. It wasn't too late for me. And boy, she got gloriously saved. Can I tell you what an exciting thing that is to be a part of His work, to see things that you just only used to read about, to watch and see God work. Listen, what a joy it is to be a part of the work of God. We went to the Philippines. Miss Graham and I have been there numerous times. I've been to the Philippines, I guess, 20 times or so. And we went to a little mountain village. We'd never been there before. Not a church, not anywhere, nothing in that whole thing that said church of any kind. Not a Catholic, not a Methodist, not a Presbyterian, not anything that had church on it. They'd asked us to come speak. It only had one public school there from kindergarten up through high school. We went class to class. I was given the assignment to preach to the teachers. And I think there was about 21 teachers in that small school. I preached to them, shared the gospel with them. 18 of them trusted Christ as their Savior. What was exciting. Then what we would call the mayor that led that little village said, I was wondering if I could gather the people of our village, would you preach to them? I said, you better believe it. And they brought the people of the village together, and I thought maybe he was a Christian. He ended up getting saved that day. But they gathered people, and I can remember the building was filled, their little city hall there, it was filled, and then outside people were out there. And I remember as I was preaching, there was an elderly man that was looking in through the window. There was no glass, but there was bars on there. And he had his hands up against her. When he began to hear the message, he took his hat off. He began to listen intensely. I pointed it out to one of the preachers as I was preaching, and they snapped a picture of him. I've got a picture of him looking in that window. And when we gave the invitation, I watched him as he yielded his heart to Jesus Christ. I said, man, I got to go meet that guy. So I went out there after the service, introduced myself. He said, my name is Ernesto. And I said, Ernesto, I couldn't help but notice that you prayed, and I want to make sure you understand. So I began to try to share the gospel with him. He said, no, preacher, I understand. Jesus saved me. I know now that I'm saved. And he said, let me tell you, I have cancer. He lifted up his shirt, and he showed me the results of cancer and what he was dealing with. And he said, I knew there was a God, but I didn't know how to get to him. And I prayed. And I said, God, I know I'm dying, and I don't know how to get to you. Somebody says, God don't listen to the prayer of a sinner. This kind he listens to. And he said, Lord, would you send somebody to tell me how I could know you? And he said, when I stepped up there and heard what you said, I knew God had heard my prayer. What a joy it was that Sunday, walk the aisle. By the way, we had to start picking them up at 3:30 in the morning to get them there in time for Sunday school. They started at 8:30. Whoa. And get him there for Sunday school down that mountain road. And so he came to church, followed the Lord in believer's baptism. What an exciting time. We got a picture of him at his baptism and afterwards. And then the next Sunday, I was already back in the States. 2 of his grandsons got saved. A week later, his wife got saved. And I'm telling you, God blessed marvelously and really shook that little village for Christ. And the church had to go start something there just to be able to handle all the converts. I'm just saying what an exciting thing it was. There's nothing like the work of Christ. Listen, folks, what you might at times feel like is labor that's in vain, it is never in vain when you're serving the King. We must labor. And on that, we need to look to the King. What pleases Him? Look to Him for direction. Look to Him for His desire. Look to Him for what He designates for your life. You know, the Bible talks about vessels. And just give you this real quick, and we're almost done. Did I say I only had 4 big points? I already give you the 4 big ones. Now we're just down to killing the little ones. But I think about being a vessel. You know, David wanted to build the house of God. He didn't get to. But David dedicated vessels for the house of God. But then when Solomon became king, he designated those vessels and said, this is where you'll work, this is where you'll work. But then one day an enemy came along by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, and he took those vessels of the Lord. And he dominated over them for a while and took them into Babylonian captivity. And then after Nebuchadnezzar came Belshazzar, who desecrated the vessels of the Lord. Now hear me tonight. Throughout my life, I've seen a lot of people who, they belong to the Lord. They've been saved. But the enemy's starting to dominate over their life. Or maybe they've gone so far that he's desecrated their life. And they might even say, well, God can never use my life. But I love it when I get to the book of Ezra. And the vessels are returned to the house of the Lord. And by the way, they had to be cleaned up. All that corruption had to be wiped off of it. But isn't it exciting when once again they were demonstrated that God wasn't finished? Aren't you glad he doesn't throw the clay away? Aren't you glad that he still wants to use your life as a vessel of honor? And listen, it doesn't matter if we're a little vessel, big vessel, impressive vessel, not noticed vessel, as long as we'll be willing to be the vessel that the King wants us to be. We must look to the King. And let me say lastly, we must love the King. Just love him. 1 John 4:19 said we love him because he first loved us. I grew up in a preacher's home. I've never known a time that I didn't believe there was a God. But I remember the day when his love became very real to me. That day I realized I was a sinner on my way to hell. Recognized that he was the Savior, the only hope of salvation. And I received him as my Savior that day. And I'll tell you, it's never been the same. And if you're not saved tonight, he wants to save your soul. And child of God, if you're saved, he wants you to be a part of his great work. Find your place in the vineyard. Next time the devil tells you nobody appreciates you, nobody cares, you just remind him, hey, devil, I'm not working for you. And I'm not even working for the praise of men or the pat on the back. I'm working for my King. As long as I'm pleasing him, that's all that matters. Let's bow our heads.